guys, welcome back to my channel. So the Booktube prize announcement was just made. I assume I'm filming this video before the announcement, but I'm scheduling it to go live after the announcement. So as far as we know, the finals have been completed and the Booktube prize winners have been announced. And I don't know which book it is yet, but I know which one I'm hoping will win. So these are the 6 nonfiction books that I judged for this round. And I'll tell you briefly about the books and why it was my favorite or not. So before I go into my rankings, I must say I don't really mind if my least favorite book of this round is the book that won, because this was an excellent group. I feel comfortable recommending any of these books to you. I feel confident that if you read any of these books, you would be just as immersed in them as I was. But that being said, I had to give them rankings. So this was my least favorite for no reason other than that I had to put a book in the number 6 spot. So Paradise Falls by Keith O'Brien was about the environmental issues that happened in the Niagara Falls region in the 1970s. And while I really enjoyed reading this book, I really enjoyed the narrative voice of this book. I love that we followed several people reading about their lives as though they were characters in a really well told play. I felt like I could envision, I felt like I could visualize these people and envision what their lives were like. I felt like I was a part of the activism, which was these women fighting for better life for their families. So I love that. I love this book, but it was my number 6 book, so go figure. So Eating to Extinction is my number 5 book. This is Dan Saladino's take on the world's rarest foods and why we need to save them. This is a great book. It talks about food and the evolution of food. And I feel like this is such an important topic because even in my adulthood, I can see how my plate, my dinner plate, has evolved. In my childhood and my teens and my very early 20s when I lived in Jamaica, we had a variety of foods every day. And now in my 40s, I live in New York City, one of the greatest cities in the world, and I feel like I eat a lot of the same things every day. And this book explains why that is, why that has been happening, why I'm not the only person who eats one variety of food all the time. Every time I choose that food, I'm eating the same variety of that food. So we're no longer enjoying the variety of a food group. So this book definitely explores that. And I love how in this book, even though Saladino talks about the issues and the problems, he also highlights the story of one person or one group that is invested in making that situation different. One place that has been keeping like the food bank or the food stores for this particular variety of food, and why it's not as terrible as it may first seem, because this person is protecting the seed, this person is protecting the remnant of that food. And so this book is also hopeful, and so I love that, but there are places where it is repetitive. So again, I don't know if this is a book that everyone will enjoy just like reading from cover to cover, but it may be the book that you can dip in and dip out of, read about the things that particularly interest you, what foods you like, look it up in here and see the history of that food, see how people are preserving that food for you. So this is my number 5 book, even though like I said, high recommendations for it if you want to pick it up. So my number 4 book is this one, The Escape Artist by Jonathan Friedland, which I felt was excellent. This is about a little known to me story of a man who escaped Auschwitz, a Jewish man who in April 1944, this 19-year-old man broke out of Auschwitz and lived to tell the world what was happening there and bring recognition and eventually freedom to the people who had been imprisoned in the concentration camps. And so this young man at 19 years old accomplished something that so many people were afraid to try or tried and failed. So this is a story that definitely needs more recognition. I really also enjoyed the narrative style of this book. I love how the story is told. I don't have any faults of this book, except that if I'm going to say my choice between this and my number 3 book, is that I just felt like this was more present and this was more of a history. So I put this below for no reason other than that this, what was written here, is something that happened in the previous century, and this is something that is still happening right now. So this is My Fourth Time We Drowned by Sally Hayden, and this is subtitled Seeking Refuge on the World's Deadliest Migration Route. This book highlights a humanitarian crisis. In this one, we're reading about North Africans who are trying to escape lots of horrible things in their homes, in their home countries, and trying to seek refuge in Europe, and what the process is like as they try to move from their countries into the place in Africa where they can leave from, but also as they try to get on the route to Europe. And so we read about the detention centers and what the process is like for someone who is captured, even if they're captured at sea and returned to Africa, what that life is like for them. There's just so much that happens to these people, and the corruption and the political subterfuge that is at work to keep these migrants or asylum seekers detained. So this is a real present issue, and so I wanted to highlight this book. So it's my number 3 book. It's not my favorite of the round, but it is definitely one that I would recommend that you read if you haven't yet. And so, even at press time, I'm still not sure how to rank these books, because these are my number 1 and number 2 books. So, number 1, I'm going to say is this book, and number 2 is this book. No, I'm going to say number 1, and no, I'm settling on I'm settling on this being my number 1 book, and this is my number 2. So An Immense World by Ed Yong is a splendid discussion of the beauty of the animal kingdom. I love how the author presents the work, that there's text, there's lots of text, and there are pictures, lots of pictures, and they're full color pictures. And just thank you to Penguin Random House for sending me this beautiful paperback copy, and I love it. So I'm very, very happy that this is a part of my collection, and I read it, and now I'm going to keep this book by my bedside so I can revisit parts of it periodically. I maybe read some of it to my daughter. I love that this book makes me feel like I'm not a nerd for being interested in why animals or people, why we do things. I felt like the author's voice is really personable in here, that even when he is sharing very deep, very well-researched scientific facts, the writing still also feels very accessible. So I don't feel like you have to be a master's level science student to read and appreciate the research that is presented here. Like, a lot of it is just really accessible writing. It's giving you sometimes nerdy facts, but I felt like at all points it was approachable. It's just that I don't know if everyone will want to read this book. Just like I don't know if everyone will want to read this book, but I think everyone should, because his name is George Floyd by Robert Samuels and Toulouse Olorunnipa. This is an excellent book, and it's not just about George Floyd. It is about George Floyd, but it's also about the world, the United States, and the society of the United States that allowed the thing that happened to George Floyd to happen to George Floyd. So it gives the story of George Floyd and his unfortunate encounter with the police officers on that day in 2020. But it also goes back and reaches into the annals of Black history in the United States and highlights some of the disenfranchisements that have happened, some of the prejudices that have happened throughout the history, and investigates why those things have happened and why they continue to persist. So like there's stories here of Floyd's parents and grandparents and his great grandparents. Like I think it was his great grandfather who was enslaved, and after he had been emancipated went on with his family to work and acquire land, and was the first black man in his state to own 500 acres of property that he hoped to pass on to his family, and just kind of showcasing how injustice was written into the fabric of the society that caused this man to lose his wealth, to not be able to pass on generational wealth, which is one of the things that would keep people out of situations like the situation that Floyd grew up in. So, you know, it is the story of George Floyd, but it's also the story of Black history and African Americans in this country. And so I feel like it's something that everyone should know, because the cry that became the protests after Floyd was murdered was something that did not just happen to African Americans in the United States. It was something that touched the world. Like there are several places in here where the author, in recounting Floyd's words in his earlier life, as he's interviewing, or as they were interviewing his former associates, his friends and his family members, they would talk about how Floyd would say he wants to touch the world. Like every time he would think about his life and be visualizing who he wanted to become in this world, he said, everybody's going to know our name. And they did, but not for the reason that I'm sure Floyd ever thought of his name being known for. So this is an excellent read. And so this is my number one book. Number two, I know, I'm just as surprised as you are. So those are my rankings for the Booktube Prize. Would love to know from you, if you read these books, what you thought of them. I really enjoyed this, and I'm going to be looking forward to seeing the video to see who won the Booktube Prize for nonfiction, who won the Booktube Prize for fiction as well. I had my favorites. So would love to chat with you in the comments down below. So thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed this whole process of weighing great books, trying to compare great books with other great books. This was a great problem to have, and I look forward to sharing this experience with you in the future. So I hope you'll join me for future videos. Until we come back for that next video, happy reading. Bye.